What's up, everybody? Welcome back to your favorite New York Jets subscription podcast, Badlands. I'm your host, Joe Caporoso. Very special Tuesday episode. Multi-time friend of the pod, Peter Schrager, is back because it's that time in Jets land where the rumors are flying, the fans are down. It's not even Thanksgiving yet, and we're talking about the offseason. Peter, thank you for joining. We greatly appreciate it. How you doing?
I'm good. This is your holiday weekend pod. You got a long drive Thursday to see family. There's going to be awkward conversations about why you're not having more kids, why you're not married yet, why you don't have a job yet, why your older brother is so much more successful than you, why your younger sister has everything. This is the pod you can turn to for all of those woes as well as your Jets woes, because I feel like holidays are tough when you're a Jets fan and you're out of it already.
The jokes are always flying, right? You could be, although if you're with Giants fans, the jokes can't fly quite as much this year. But let's start at the top. Much like you, I was optimistic about this season. I thought the Jets would break their playoff drought. I didn't think they were necessarily going to knock Buffalo off the throne, but I thought they would get in the playoffs. Now, clearly we're not headed in that direction. If someone asked you, what happened? What went wrong this year? What would be the shortest way you would describe why this just hasn't worked when a lot of us thought this had a real chance to work?
I'll give a quick preamble on why this is particularly painful for me. I've not been that this is the year guy ever with the Jets. And I live in New York, and obviously I have a relationship with the team. I've done preseason games in the past. I've, go to all the practices in the summer, but I'm never that guy. I resist, and I didn't grow up a Jets fan. I grew up a Giants fan. So it's not like I've got this since 1916, I'm not in the same shoes as you. I put my name on it and I went all in this year based on all of the good things I saw this summer, all of the amazing vibes, what I thought was an excellent free agency period, an excellent draft. I mean, do you recall that we were doing fist pumps over Malachi Corley?
Yeah.
And that they were flexing in the draft room over getting Malachi Corley. And the stories that we were hearing from camp, I've told this story before, and I said it on either Good Morning Football or Bill Simmons' podcast last week, but Kyle Brandt and I went to camp random August morning, and we were doing it from Jets camp. And Jets PR has to funnel through all these different obligations for what they're asked for. So Sirius Satellite Radio was there that day. And I guess Rodgers didn't do their show last year. And it was Jim Miller and Pat Kerwin or whoever was doing it for the midday. And Rodgers, I don't think he stiffed them or whatever, but last year they didn't get Rodgers. So this year they were coming that day, and it was he's got to do Sirius. They're a league partner. They're a partner with us. Rodgers going to do that. So you don't get Rodgers. And I was a little bummed. I'm all right. And I'm how about Garrett Wilson? They're offense is tough. They've got meetings throughout the morning when your show is on. So you're not going to get Wilson. You're not going to get Breece Hall. You're not going to get Tyron Smith. And I'm fuck. I mean, that limits it. And I'm all right, well then how about we'll take Quinnen Williams. They're Quinnen did yesterday. So I'm furious. I'm well, we came all the way down here. We got NFL Network. They're we'll give you Sauce Gardner. I'm well, that's pretty good. And we'll give you Quincy Williams. I'm he's a good quote, and he's an all-pro player. That's pretty good. We'll give you Solomon Thomas. I'm well, he's pretty good. We'll give you DJ Reed. I'm that's great. We'll give you CJ Mosley. And I'm yeah, we'll take them. Those are 5. And then I'm the Jets are 20 deep with household names that you would take as an interview. And these guys are all really good. Sauce and Garrett were supposed to be, entering these prime years. Rodgers is healthy.
Team All-Pro.
First team. I'm not an idiot. You're not an idiot. We saw it all summer. They were dialed in. And now granted, in hindsight, do you start picking apart? Well, they actually didn't play in the preseason and Rodgers wasn't there for that mandatory camp. And sure. But they were 2-1 after a tough loss on Monday night and the win over Tennessee and then the win in week 3. They were 2-1. And I would have doubled down then and said, I still love this team. I still think so. The London trip was brutal. The Denver loss was hideous. And then, the Buffalo game, if Zerline can just make one of those field goals, the season can be salvaged even after they fired Saleh. But then after that Buffalo game, I feel all hope was lost. The wind was out of the sails. And then the fans, I don't blame them, but it's all right, well, if you're going to fire the coach 5 weeks in, you're telling us that shit's out of control in that building, because that's completely inexplicable for any team that plans on being competitive. But what I've learned this year is that with this franchise, and you guys live it every day and live with it every year, and I have a million Jets fans in my life, like just when you don't think it could be any more confusing or any more unorganized or any more incompetent with how things are handled on a day-to-day basis, it feels like they prove you wrong. And then the following season's even worse than the last. I did not anticipate us doing a end of season, let's look forward to who the coach and GM podcast is before Thanksgiving. I'll tell you that.
I think this is up there with 2016 and maybe 2011 as the most disappointing seasons.
Was 2011 where Rex salvaged his job at the end with a win over Miami, and we were
that was 2013. That started the Gatorade bath culture. They went 8-8. Yes. They did a Gatorade bath and haven't made the playoffs since. 2011 was they were 8-5, lost 3 in a row. Thank you, Victor Cruz. Missed the playoffs, and the Giants won the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So Salah's gone. Douglas is gone. Hackett's been demoted. Most Jet fans, I would say, at least in our corner of the world, feel a bit adrift. And I think they're generally hoping, even with the news that came out yesterday about how this search is going to be conducted, which I thought was interesting, and we'll talk about more, and it's definitely a little unconventional, that can the Jets, especially with Woody likely heading somewhere else next year, can they bring in some type of senior football operations lead to look at the entire infrastructure of the org? Scouting, analytics, sports medicine, who is in the football half of the building? Can they put up some kind of slight church and state between the business half and the football half? Because the perception, of course, is that business is far too involved in the Jets football decisions. It could be too reactive to the media and press. That might be inevitable in this market. But can they bring in a serious football guy or serious football guys to tell them the right kind of GM to hire, the right kind of head coach to hire, and then allow those individuals to say, we're going to just rebuild this whole thing from scratch. We're not going to have carryovers from the McCagnon and Idzik era or even back to the original Tannenbaum era, which was generally successful. We're just going to start fresh. Is there any hope of something like that happening? Or is this going to be sort of another Corn Ferry, Charlie Casserly, half measure type rebuild?
All right, so let's go through this character you're envisioning. I'm very close to the guys in Detroit. And when Detroit was at their rock bottom, I was sideline reporter for a Fox team that was Tom Brenneman, Chris Spielman, and myself. And Chris Spielman calls Tom and I and he'd been doing preseason for the Lions for years and was a Lions legend. And he calls Tom and I and says, "Can you guys hop on the phone real quick?" He's like, "I'm talking to the Lions. Like, I feel like I could help. I'm gonna get in there, and I might actually take a job with the Lions and leave Fox." And I'm like, "You're gonna leave Fox, where you're the number 3 announcer, to go work for the worst franchise in sports, and do what exactly?" And he's like, "Well, I'm gonna help them get things in order, and I'm gonna be the voice for the owners, and then also work with Rod Wood, the president, and we're gonna try to find the right coach, the right GM, and we'll go through the process." I was like, that sounds like an ambiguous role that they're just hiring you as a face to take the bullets, and I don't even know what that means. 4 years later, they're the best team in football. Spielman gets no credit, gets no love, but he was in the room with the owners when they were doing all the interviews, and he was one who advocated for Dan Campbell. I say all this because here was a football man who had no ego, had a relationship with the organization, and who could talk back to the owners and be like, "No, actually, this is how it is," and also be okay with not being Brad Holmes or Dan Campbell. I don't know any others in the league who are that. So let's go to the Jets universe, and you want to get the warm and fuzzies and start creating these people like Curtis Martin is what Gary Myers said. I think Curtis Martin, between us, Joe, is worth $300 million with his business interests.
Do some more work and come here.
What world is Curtis Martin other than just doing this for a press release and then not showing up? Dan Marino has a role with the Dolphins. I respect Dan Marino a ton. Dan Marino's not making football decisions at the level that you're looking for what he does with the Dolphins. Doug Williams is involved with the Commanders. Again, they're in the building, right? Doug Williams is not the man at the switch making it. So I ask you, I turn the table, like this football, like, are we talking about a former league executive? Are we talking about a former Jets coach? Like, because I guess, and I know, like, I don't think it's, I'll say this. I talk to people within the Jets building at every level, like I'm still talking to Saleh and Douglas this week, to guys above them who are still there, to people who have roles in the organization that have been there for 20 years. And I don't think they're going to leave any stone unturned. So when I see Diana report that like Mangini's a name, I don't roll my eyes.
No, me
In fact, I say Mangini's a smart guy. Mangini's coached with the Jets and the Browns. Mangini, the Jets fans, they're not going to run and scream. Like, that would be a win. Talk to Mangini. Now, it doesn't mean hire Mangini, and I don't mean as coach or GM. I mean as some sort of role in the organization. And maybe it is GM. Say all this to say, yes, there is a desire to get things right. And this football czar that we're going to have, like Peyton Manning's not coming, guys. And Curtis Martin's not coming. And you need to have someone, most importantly, and I'll say this, and I might get my security badge, or my credential removed. Like, you got to be able to manage up and deal with Woody. And a lot of people don't know what that means when they walk in the door. And then even when they're out the door, don't know what it meant because they're out the door. But like, Woody Johnson is likely not going to be there in the next 4 years, but he'll still be in the hiring process and we'll still rely on this person. And Woody Johnson's going to have to talk to this person on a daily basis. And this person's going to have to manage expectations, but also it's a corporate environment if you've got an owner who you've got to report to. And at a certain point, a lot of these ex-players and these ex-coaches, like, I don't need to do that. So as much as that's hard to listen to, I feel like it's kind of a ideal job to paint as a job description, but I don't have the perfect candidate. And I don't know if you guys have batted around enough names that is that guy.
No, it's a hard person to name. People talk about Pete Carroll. Is he going to want to do that at this age? Is there another former player like a DeBrickashaw Ferguson? These are all like, man, we're throwing stuff out there.
No. I like Brick. I think DeBrickashaw Ferguson. So if they hired DeBrickashaw Ferguson, who's obviously a smart guy at the University of Virginia and one of the great Jets of this generation, does that satisfy the fan base? Do they say, okay, well, at least we have one of us, like one of our guys?
I do think having someone, and again, I don't think this is a direct football role. It's more like the Spielman role you described, where it's like, it's less of having to hear from Woody and from Chris and legal and business. And this person is kind of like the face who handles that. Now, maybe that doesn't matter at all, right? At the end of the day, you got to nail the GM, you got to nail the head coach, you got to nail quarterback, or none of this stuff really matters. I do think like people are just sort of at a loss because Jets have tried everything. Consulting firm, former GM, just having the Johnsons hire the person themselves. They've tried the second overall pick, the third overall pick, the second round quarterback, Rodgers. They've tried everything throughout the drought. McCown. So I think at this point, you see the news like the 33rd team come. You hear names like Mangini and Rex like really seriously being talked about. And I think Jet fans Mangini's remembered very fondly here because the Jet fan sentiment, fair or unfair, is that Mangini built the teams that Rex won with. Jet fans will always love Rex because he has a lot of pride in the Jets and being Jet. And I don't know whether this is a real thing or not, or if he's going to get an interview. I know fans, as much as many fans say they hate it and it's crazy, if he actually got hired, they would rally behind it. The Tannenbaum stuff from yesterday, 33rd team, I think to many casual fans is kind of a nebulous thing. I know a little bit about it just because I'm in sort of the media space. I've heard of them, a fan of what they do.
It's like they do mock drafts and they do you're not getting.
It's interesting.
It's not a trade magazine of sports business by any means. No.
Yeah, and look, we're pretty I call us pretty pro Tannenbaum here because he was 57 and 55. He went to the AFC Championship game twice. And I've looked at previous GMs getting a lot of praise for the Jets who never made the playoffs. So I don't mind a Tannenbaum and a Spielman from the Vikings being involved in this process. How does this work really? Because I don't know any other teams who've worked with a media company like this. And I know they have other services, but like, how did this come about? And like, what are the next steps now in November for this search? What does that mean? And then we can wrap with some candidates.
I have a couple thoughts on it. And I know that here's what happens in our sports media world, and for better or worse, a report goes out, and in this case, it was accurate that they're gonna support, and then the aggregators will come. So you get like the Dov Kleinman, the Ari Mirov, and then you get the other reporters, the Rappaports, the Dianas, the Jonathan Jones of CBS, and then they'll just kind of say, yep, confirming this. And then you'll get like the ex-player on Twitter, like chiming in. Then you'll get the fans, and then it becomes this Mike Tannenbaum's picking the next coach and GM. Now, look, I think Tannenbaum's great. I actually have had a real good relationship with him over the years, and he's a smart guy. And obviously he does some work on ESPN, so he's still plugged in to the NFL. I don't think Mike Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman are picking the next head coach and GM. I also think this might be the first of several different voices that are going to be consulted, and those names might come from a search firm, or that those names might come from someone else in the football world. And I don't know exactly who those folks are, but just knowing how this will go, they're going to support the process, meaning they're going to provide their names. They might or may not be in the interview process. They might not even be. It might be, hey, here are the names, and then we're going to let Jets leadership meet with these people directly. Usually these search firms that are brought in, it's been Korn Ferry. There's a guy named Mike Ford who's been very successful. Jed Hughes is very similar. A lot of times what these guys do is they're sending you the same names that you're going to get from NFL.com or a Bleacher Report list. You're getting the same names. What they do is they help do the full background search. So you're not getting a known criminal, like when you walk through the door and you're dealing with it and there's no resume lies. They're doing the full background search. They're getting those guys prepared for what the organization wants. And they usually do a very good job in that by the time these individuals come in, the agents are well versed on what this job is and who they need to bring in with them. And it's basically all the logistics and the bullshit of any job hiring process. A lot of these search firms will do. It's very rare. They're like, hey, have you considered this Northern Arizona wide receivers coach who we have an eye on? Like it's that. Now, I think what you get with Tannenbaum and Spielman is you get years of experience in dealing with front offices, and you get to tap into these. Now, I saw the original list that they put out before they were announced has since been taken down on the internet. So now it's a 404 website, which isn't a great look, but it also says that wasn't really their official list. That was a list that like, hey, slap something together, put it up. Some other writer's probably going to do it. And then we'll go, oh, wait, now they're going to be using this? Like, no. We actually have to do the work now. So I think, is it conventional to use I don't consider them a media company. I consider them two guys who have a decade's worth of experience, who have done this time and time again, have hired different people and have seen it all. I mean, I knew Rick Spielman when he was back in Miami, and he's obviously Chris's brother. So I've known him then. So like, you're talking decades worth of guys in the front office who can offer their expertise. But I also, when I say the thing about the media, like the blowing it up, this isn't, oh, okay, well, Tannenbaum and Spielman are going to do it. Spielman's going to nominate himself, and now Rick Spielman's a GM. I don't see that happening.
The Dick Cheney situation, which we've been getting
exactly.
I
don't see it.
So let's close by talking about some of the names. So Jet fans now, I mean, the fact that we were doing this starting around Halloween, like,
you want to do GM first? Let's do GM and then head coach.
Let's do GM first. So GM's harder, right? And it's always sort of the same. It used to always be, the dude from the Ravens who would never take a job that would always get thrown out. I'm forgetting his name right now, which is driving me crazy.
Dude from the Ravens. Oh, Joe Ortiz? Or who?
It was him, and there was another guy from the Ravens DaCosta. Jets got to hire DaCosta. Now I feel like
DaCosta's pretty set there.
Yes, and now I feel like it's the dude from the Chiefs. Borgonzi, is it?
Borgonzi, yeah.
Could we get him? Agnew from the Lions. I've seen Donna Ponte mentioned in a few places that you get. Those are the three names I've heard at the GM level.
Let me go. Let's go through some of them.
Yeah. And
Mike
also
Borgonzi
from Tampa. Yeah.
And I'll go into Greenberg too. Mike Borgonzi, Brown football player, smart guy, has learned from all those guys in Kansas City. So originally it's obviously Andy Reid's at the top of that thing, but Borgonzi is with Brett Veach, but also was working alongside Ryan Poles and just whatever. He's ready. He's probably 40, 41, 42. Maybe I'm taking away years off him. Maybe he's like 45. He's ready. He's not a splash name, but you look at that, you're like, Kansas City has built an amazing infrastructure. Why not give him a shot? Ivy League guy, smart, play game, cool. I would be a fan of Borgonzi. I don't know what his current role bar hit, but I know he's worn all the different hats there. That's one of the key elements. Was considered a couple years ago for one of the jobs, but didn't get interviews last year at some of the places I thought he would. So I was surprised by that. And I think this year he's more than ready. So that's a good hire. Agnew, awesome guy. I knew him back in LA, knew him in Detroit. Great. Again, these are solid hires. No real connections to the Jets, whatever. Greenberg's interesting in that Greeny grew up a Jets fan, like diehard Jets fan. His brother Jay lives in Brooklyn. His parents still live in Merrick. Like, they're diehard Jet fans. Like, he's been with Tampa 20 years. They're still all Jet fans. Greenberg's probably 40. Interned for Tannenbaum way back when. So there's a connection to Tannenbaum there. And I'll tell you, he's not a scout. Like, he could see things. Like we talk all the time. I'll be completely unbiased or completely biased, whatever it is. Like I know the guy well. I've known him since he got to Tampa. Jason Light is the GM. John Spytek's the number 2 there as far as like player evaluation. There's a guy, Rob McCartney, who's really talented and is young. And like those guys are what makes Tampa's roster through the draft and free agency. All the other stuff, how do we figure out keeping Mike Evans? How do we figure out getting Levante David here? Okay, well, Brady is going to come during COVID, but we've got to figure out a way to get Brady through the door without anyone knowing. Greenberg's a wizard and like beloved around the league. Every agent says he's among the best when it comes to negotiations, but also managing the cap. He'd be tremendous. He's not your traditional, I lived in a van for 6 months scouting the Southeast region. Yeah. That's not him. He came in from the business side of it and would be a home run hire. But Jet fans would have to get over the fact that, oh wait, this is like not the guy who is at the Senior Bowl eating sunflower seeds and seeing a guy in the, at the corner and saying that's the next talent. So he would hire those guys. So you go through those type of names. Then you start thinking like, are there any outside the box names? Are there any guys we're not looking for? And that's what Tannenbaum and Spielman are going to be charged for. Like I look at a guy, Tony Pastors in LA, who is, I'd say Kevin Demoff is the president. Les Snead is the GM. And then McKay, who is Rich McKay's kid, is the number 2 and is fantastic, but a little too young probably. Tony's kind of like in between Demoff, the owner, and the football side. And Tony's brilliant. I don't know if he would ever leave the Rams, which is like this stable organization, but there's this other level of guys, and Greenberg's in that level where it's not the GM and it's not quite the pro personnel guy, but it's someone that knows the entire building and ties it all together. If I'm the Jets, that is kind of the role that I would need. And maybe you hire that and someone else's GM. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's where you get your Ray Agnew. That's where you get your Borgonzi. There's a long list of people who are qualified in the league. It's going to be personality. And I think for the 90th time, it's going to be the ability to handle those 2 owners. And that's Woody. And if he's not here, Christopher, who, as we know, is a lot easier to deal with, I would imagine, just from what you hear from the years that Woody wasn't here. Everything was civil and great and streaming upstream.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said about Greenberg is going to catch a lot of people's ears here because he's not a name that's been talked about a lot. And there's been like 3 different people who've been tweeting to me consistently about him to the point I was like, I gotta research this dude. And it's just interesting how some of these names like surface. Kind of happened similarly with like Douglas before he got hired.
I'll give you one thing on Greenberg though. He interviewed for Carolina last year for the GM job. He didn't get it. They gave it to Dan Morgan, who is in-house, but he interviewed really well for Carolina. So it's not like you're saying, oh, he was a Jets fan as a kid, let's hire him. Like, no, he's more than qualified. Other teams have gone through it. Yeah. And if I was to say, like, would I recommend him? Absolutely, I would recommend him. But I would also recommend Borgonzi. I'd also recommend these other guys. I think that's why you go through the process. And your issue is we have to trust who's doing the hiring, right? Like,
yes.
That's where we're at.
So head coach, before we wrap,
as you could imagine, this is the big one.
It's Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. Obviously, Aaron Glenn, another guy with Jets ties. Are we terrified of defensive minds because of what's happened with Saleh and Bowles?
How much does the Jets connection matter to you?
I mean, a little bit. I think people have a little more sentimentality for Glenn than they would for another defensive coach because of his history here, and he was very well liked. And I think you don't write off hiring a defensive guy. You hire the best head coach, and coordinator and head coach are different. Also, Minter has become a very popular name. Connor's a pretty big advocate for him, so he's got me kind of spinning on that.
Okay.
Watching the Chargers last night. Jet fans still like Monken. I feel like Monken's not going to come here after 2019. I could be wrong. That's a name that gets tossed around a lot. Of course, everyone likes Rabel. You know what you're getting. Let's get a guy who's been a head coach before. Let's get a guy who's won before. No coordinator roulette. Get a proven head coach. Is he going to come here? Is he going to be way too popular? And
I think he'd listen. I think Vrabel wants to get back in.
Vrabel would be a very popular hire.
And Vrabel would push back on Woody. I'll tell you that. Yes. He's not going to. I mean, that's part of the reason things didn't. He let his voice be heard in that building in Tennessee.
Yep. And I would say last but not least, a couple Joe Brady, Kingsbury rumblings, although I'm not sure how popular they end up being here, fair or unfair. I know Brady interviewed here, I think, before as a head coach, and so did Kingsbury. Those are most of the names that I've heard. I think the consensus most popular pick is probably Vrabel, although it does feel like Minter is getting a little steam now, of which I'll give Connor the credit for really kind of seeding that out there with Jet fans.
I
what do we think
think
here?
I got to be careful because I don't want to say something and you think that I'm indicating
Don't
what the
aggregate
organization.
Peter here. Don't aggregate him.
Yeah, it's the old Simmons line. Don't aggregators, don't bother.
We're just talking. We're riffing here.
All right, so they went offense with Gase.
Yep.
Didn't work. And then between Bowles and Saleh, you've had young quarterbacks, and it's not. I would think if you're looking to move on from Rodgers, you got a young quarterback. I would think you'd want to have one of these bright offensive minds. I think Ben Johnson, as much as it's crazy that he has still been a coordinator, like each one of those situations was different. 2 years ago, Carolina job was probably his. He was like, I feel like that's not ideal. Looking at the situation, I'm going to stay there. Then last year, the Washington gig was pretty much his, and I don't know how much that's been reported. And he bailed at the last second and was like, I'm going to stay here and do this. Why would he pick the Jets? Well, money matters. Let's see what they offer him. And I don't know, maybe the New York market and being the guy that fixes the thing is it. So I wouldn't immediately do this, woe is me, there's no chance he'd come here. There's a lot to like about the New York Jets roster, and there's a lot to like about the New York Jets franchise and the history and the fans. Like, so let's swing the bat. Let's go for him. I'm way higher on Cliff than others. Obviously, I have a relationship with Cliff. I've been covering him for years, all the way back to Texas Tech. He and I built up a relationship, and I thought, if you have a young quarterback, find me a better person for a young quarterback, whether it be Kyler, whether it be Caleb, whether it be Jaden Daniels. And I know you're saying, well, second half of the season, they've fallen off. And I think a lot of Washington Commanders fans would sign up for 7-5 right now based on what we thought this would be and how that offense is working. Minter's smart, good, everyone thinks he's from Michigan. He comes from the Ravens, really. He was with the Ravens for many years. He and Mike McDonald in Seattle have very similar paths where they did the year or two in Michigan, came back to Baltimore, worked in Baltimore. And then for Minter's case, he was a DC at Vanderbilt also, but Harbaugh brought him with him, and they've been great on defense. And it's not just Bosa and Derwin James. They're getting career years from guys who have not had career years. So I think he's solid, but he's defense. He reminds me a lot of Saleh if you're not looking to, if you're looking at just job titles and what they've been through and how they've been with, strong-minded head coaches, and they're the defensive guys. Joe Brady, I'm a fan of. I would bring him in. Trying to think. Vrabel, I don't think you're going down the college route. I don't think we're doing that. There's no one that interests. Like a couple years ago, Matt Campbell had a lot of love, and Matt Rule had a lot of love, and PJ Fleck's name is always mentioned. I don't see any of those guys being the fixes here. You've got a couple guys with Jets ties that are not being mentioned anywhere that I might throw out here as just names. And I don't talk to the organization about hey, this is going to be other people's jobs, but Josh McCown is doing a hell of a job as the quarterbacks coach in Minnesota right now. Yep. And he's working with Sam, obviously. And he, in a lot of ways, it was assumed that he was going to get a real shot in Houston a couple years back. And they ended up either going with David Culley or Lovie Smith, and it was a disaster. After 1 year, they fired it. But McCown was a very, very hot name in that building, and they thought he was going to be the guy. And then last year, obviously, that Carolina mess, but now he's having success. So Josh McCown, who was, I think, a well-liked Jet, I think has a young future as a coach. He's 40-something, maybe not as the head coach of the Jets that you're looking for, but let's bring him in. And then a name that no one has mentioned that I'll just put out there. You watch this Denver defense, and I know we're not saying defense. Do you know who the defensive coordinator is? It's Vance Joseph. Do you know who's running that defensive backs room, who's been outstanding in Denver in 1 year with Sean Payton? Do you have any idea? I'm not putting you on the spot.
Who?
Jim Leonard is running that defense in the back end.
The Rex years, bringing him back.
So if you're talking about old Jets, I don't need Rex necessarily or Mangini. Maybe there is a young voice, and maybe there's someone who's been building a resume that isn't. I'll say this about Rex. I love it. And what I really appreciate about him, he's not advocating for himself for the Bears job or the Saints job. Rex wants to be the Jets coach. And I think there's something real to that. And Rex wants to bring glory, and that's all authentic. I would want to see Rex's staff because I know he interviewed. Who's the OC? Yeah. Are we bringing your brother as a DC? Is your son the OC?
Patton coming back?
Mike Patton coming back? And again, that's very dismissive of me. I don't work with Rex at ESPN. I'm sure he has a list of guys that he's already reached out to. But I would want to see, because I think Rex is great for the rah-rah, and Rex is great to motivate these guys, and he genuinely would be an awesome guy to have in the building because he loves it. I would want to know who else is coming with him. So those are just a few names that I would put out there. Vrabel's going to obviously interview and get a whack. I think Rex will interview. I honestly do. I think they'll give Rex the respect to interview him. And I think that's the beauty of this thing. When you fire Saleh so early and you fire Joe Douglas, you could do exercises like this and you can talk through it. But to me personally, young quarterback, get me a young head coach, because the second you get an OC that gels with him, and they have any success, he's going to be plucked and he's going to be gone. Look what's happening in Washington. I think Kingsbury's going to get another head coaching job. And history just tells us the second a young quarterback has success, that offensive coordinator is hired somewhere else. That's why I would hire a young head coach who's on the offensive side of the ball.
I like it. And it's an interesting spread of people they could be talking to. Before we go, one word answer real quick. And thank you for being so generous with your time.
This is great. No, it's good.
Is Aaron Rodgers on the Jets in 2025? Yes or no?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. I'm skewing 60-40 no. I could be persuaded otherwise.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
Moving towards no.
I think you're right.
Okay.
I think you're right. I think that the honeymoon's obviously over. I don't know the relationship. I mean, you hear these stories about the fractions in the building. I don't think Woody and Aaron are going on vacation, but I also don't think there's any like blood feud between them. And there's a lot of reports they're going to shut Rodgers down. Like, he's starting Sunday. Like, he practiced yesterday. Like, everyone's out for blood, and it gets a lot of clicks. But like, as crazy as this season has been, just be careful what everything you read being fact. Like, there's a lot of voices that are talking, and when you fire multiple people in multiple years, there's a lot of voices who want to weigh in, and those are legitimate sources.
Yeah, the league starts sprouting. Peter, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate the time. Once these hires are made, we'll have to get you back on and talk through. But I would say, everyone, keep an open mind. Cast a wide net here. It's going to be a multi-month process, and as I always say, there's nowhere to go but up for the Jets.
If the hire is Kingsbury, because I'm being honest, I think he'd be fantastic. What's the reaction from Jets fans? Not happy?
It's going to depend on the plan at quarterback. Is it Kingsbury and Cam Ward? Is it Kingsbury and Rodgers? I think he'd get more of a shot, and people will be more open-minded than you think, because people want points. People want offense. The Jets have been bad on offense since I've been 22, and I'm 37 now. I think they'd be more open-minded than you think they may be.
Okay.
All right.
That might be my pick.
Okay. Kingsbury, Greenberg. That's where we're putting your unofficial picks and predictions early. We're going to change it.
Early, not predictions.
Early.
Not predictions.
Very early.
Picks.
Not predictions. Picks. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Buddy.
We'll talk to you soon. Here.